Manuel II Palaiologos stands on the brink of destruction as Bayezid I lays siege to Constantinople. What begins as a city slowly strangled by blockade ends as a dynasty trapped by its own reprieves. The Palaiologoi inherit an empire reduced to a fortified capital and a few scattered holdings, too weak to fight, too proud to surrender, too politically compromised to unite. Each rescue carries a price. Oaths sworn to Ottoman sultans, humiliating diplomacy with Latin powers, and religious bargains that split the city's soul. Out of these bargains comes Constantine, Zixai, crowned not as a conqueror, but as a debtor of history, forced to choose between doctrinal purity and military aid, between keeping order and provoking civil fracture, between surrender that might preserve lives and resistance that might preserve legitimacy. When the final siege comes, it is not simply an Ottoman assault on walls. It is the collapse of every delaying tactic his predecessors used to keep the empire breathing. Bayezid I does not need to storm Constantinople to break it. In 1394, he tightens the noose. Forts on the Bosporus, patrols controlling maritime access, pressure on the countryside that feeds the city. Manuel II's court becomes a chamber of arithmetic, grain levels, bribe money, and the risk of revolt if rations shrink again. Inside the walls, every faction hears the same question differently. If the emperor submits, who loses rank, property, or life? If he resists, who starves first? Manuel's options are structurally thin. Byzantium cannot field an army that can meet Bayezid. Its navy cannot force open supply lines. Its legitimacy still draws on the claim of being the Roman Empire, but that claim is now a liability. It makes surrender feel like sacrilege, even when surrender might keep the population alive. So Manuel reaches for the only lever left: external recognition. He dispatches envoys and sealed appeals to Western courts, asking for help that would arrive late, arrive small, or arrive attached to demands for church union. The emperor's bargaining position is visible in every petition. Constantinople offers prestige, not power. When Bayezid escalates, he does it publicly. He backs rival claimants, encourages defections, and makes submission seem like the only rational choice. The siege becomes a referendum on whether the emperor can still protect anyone. Manuel can punish dissent, but punishment inside a starving city risks turning fear of the Turks into fear of the palace. Then the siege breaks for a reason that has nothing to do with Byzantine strength. In 1402, Timur Tamerlane invades Anatolia. Ottoman forces pull away to meet a catastrophe larger than Constantinople. Bayezid is defeated at Ankara and taken captive. The immediate result is not Byzantine victory, but Ottoman fracture. For a moment, Constantinople is spared because the predator is wounded. That reprieve is the dynasty's curse. It teaches Byzantium a dangerous lesson. Survival can be purchased by waiting for someone else's war. The court reads the world like gamblers, scanning horizons for the next collision of empires. The city lives on borrowed time, and borrowed time changes behavior. Instead of rebuilding the military base, it no longer has. Constantinople invests in diplomacy, marriage ties, and theological bargaining, tools that preserve a throne but cannot stop a cannon. By the time John VIII Palaiologos takes the throne in 1425, the Ottoman threat has reassembled. The Ottoman state is no longer distracted by Timur's invasion. It is reorganizing, learning, consolidating. John's constraint is brutal. The empire's borders are too small to tax enough revenue for real defense, and its allies treat Byzantium as a bargaining chip. If he wants an army, he must trade something more valuable than money. So John attempts the trade that previous emperors had delayed: church union with Rome. The logic is cold. Western kings and popes speak the language of crusade. But crusade requires a moral pretext and a political win. A reunited church would let Latin powers claim they were saving Christians, not propping up schismatics. For John, union is not theology first, it is a military procurement plan. The Council of Florence in 1439 becomes a stage where desperation has to look like free choice. Byzantine delegates debate filioque, purgatory, papal primacy, issues that sound abstract until they translate into authority. If the emperor accepts papal primacy, Who commands the church in Constantinople? Which bishops lose influence? Which monasteries lose immunity? A signed decree would not just bring Western aid, it would rearrange power inside the city. John signs, some argue he believed union was spiritually necessary, others that he signed under duress, knowing the West would not deliver enough troops anyway. Either way, the consequence in Constantinople is immediate and poisonous. Anti-union clergy frame the agreement as betrayal, while pro-union officials frame resistance as suicidal pride. The empire does not gain a unified front. It gains an internal loyalty test. When John dies in 1448, the throne passes to his brother Constantine. His legitimacy is already entangled in the union question. He must keep Western doors open without detonating the city from within. He has ruled in the Morea in the Peloponnese, where power can be exercised with cavalry raids and castle sieges. In Constantinople, power depends on managing factions that share the same walls and hate each other almost as much as they fear the Turks. Constantine XI is crowned in 1449 with ceremony that cannot hide a basic fact. He is inheriting an endgame. The empire is now essentially a city-state whose greatest asset is its name. Every decision is forced by what Constantinople still symbolizes. If he surrenders, he becomes the emperor who dissolved Rome. If he refuses and loses, he becomes the martyr king. But martyrdom does not feed children or preserve property. Legitimacy anxiety is not vanity here, it is governance. A ruler who looks ready to concede invites coup plots, defections, and surrender negotiations conducted behind his back. He tries to build leverage. He sends letters to the papacy and Italian maritime powers, Venice, Genoa, requesting ships, artillery specialists, money, but those powers have their own constraints. Trade with the Ottomans is profitable, crusade is expensive, and Byzantium cannot pay its debts. Aid comes in fragments, small contingents, individual captains, promises worded to preserve plausible deniability. Inside the city, Constantine makes a decision that signals desperation and calculation at once. He allows the Unionist liturgy to be proclaimed in Hagia Sophia. It is a political broadcast more than a religious service. It tells the West in public that Constantinople is compliant. It tells the anti-union faction that the emperor is willing to risk unrest to purchase the only currency he has left. The backlash is real. Clergy and lay people fear that accepting Latin rites means losing not only tradition, but local authority, courts, lands, and influence. Some insist it would be better to accept the Turks' rule than the Pope's. Constantine cannot jail half the clergy. He cannot allow them to sabotage the defense. His control depends on a narrow corridor of consent. Then the structural force that no emperor can negotiate with arrives fully formed. Ottoman succession has produced a ruler who wants Constantinople as a capital, not as a tribute-paying trophy. Mehmed II takes the Ottoman throne in 1451. He is young, ambitious, and intent on making conquest the foundation of legitimacy. For Mehmed, taking Constantinople is not optional. It is the act that will silence rivals, impress soldiers, and claim the mantle of world empire. Constantine tests Mehmed with diplomacy, requests for subsidies, hints that Byzantine claimants could be used against Ottoman stability. It is the old Byzantine method, weaponized legitimacy disputes inside the Ottoman house. Mehmed answers with infrastructure. In 1452, he orders the construction of Rumeli Hisari on the European side of the Bosporus, opposite an older fortress on the Asian shore. This is not a castle for show, it is a chokehold. With that fort, Mehmed can cut Black Sea traffic and control supplies. Any ship that refuses inspection is fired upon. It is blockade turned into permanent policy. Constantine sees the meaning immediately. A meeting of the city's leaders, imperial officials, church representatives, military commanders, and prominent merchants cannot produce a solution, only assignments of sacrifice. Who funds repairs? Who mans the walls? Which foreign captains can be trusted with gates? Which neighborhoods will be rationed first? The city's defense becomes a map of social risk. He strengthens the land walls, repairing sections of the Theodosian fortifications, clearing fields of fire, organizing watches, but he cannot conjure manpower. Constantinople's population has shrunk drastically from its medieval peak. Defenders number in the thousands, not tens of thousands. Every additional soldier is either a foreign volunteer or a citizen pulled from essential labor. Foreign help arrives in the form of individuals rather than armies. The most consequential is Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese commander from Chios, who brings trained men and is given authority over key sectors of the walls. This is a risky delegation. Granting a foreigner major command can look like weakness, but it also signals competence. Constantine needs a professional to stiffen the defense, and he needs the public to see that the emperor is not isolated. Mehmed arrives in force in early April 1453. The siege begins on April 6th. The Ottoman camp is a machine, infantry, engineers, siege trains, and, crucially, large bombards capable of battering walls that had defied earlier armies. The physical anchor of the new age is the cannon's rhythm: impact, dust, repairs, repeat, turning prestige fortifications into a daily emergency. Constantine's decisions now are measured in hours. Each night, damage reports come in. Each dawn, he must decide where to allocate men, timber, and morale. A council can advise, but authority has to be singular. When a breach appears, there is no time for factional debate. Mehmed presses with both force and psychological warfare. He offers terms: surrender in exchange for safety for inhabitants and property. Such offers are not mercy, they are designed to split defenders. If Constantine accepts, his reign is reduced to a signature that ends the empire. If he refuses, Mehmed can tell his troops that the city chose blood, and that plunder is justified. Constantine refuses. The refusal is not romantic, it is strategic and existential. A negotiated surrender might spare lives, but it would also erase the emperor's legitimacy and likely end in broken promises once the gates open. Byzantine experience with shifting Ottoman guarantees makes trust a liability, and within the city, surrender could spark immediate violence between those who wanted terms and those who would rather die orthodox and free. Resistance, however doomed, keeps the chain of command intact. The Ottomans bombard. Assaults probe weak points. The defenders respond with repairs, sorties, and desperate economy. The Golden Horn becomes its own crisis. A heavy chain blocks the harbor entrance, preventing Ottoman ships from entering directly. Mehmed answers with a decision meant to shock. He has ships hauled overland on greased timbers into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain. The move is not just tactical, it is propaganda in motion, demonstrating that no Byzantine trick still works against Ottoman engineering. Now Constantine's perimeter expands. He has to defend seawalls as well as land walls with the same limited men. Every reassignment weakens another sector. Inside the city, rumors become weapons. Some claim betrayal by Genoese, others accuse Unionists of bringing divine punishment. Others whisper that a gate will be opened. Constantine must suppress panic without provoking it. Public executions might enforce obedience, but they could also confirm that the government is losing control. A debated question hangs over these weeks. Could the West have saved Constantinople if it had acted decisively? Some accounts emphasize Western indifference and fragmentation, Venice and Genoa hedging to protect trade, the papacy lacking the power to compel kings. Others note that even a larger relief force would have faced Ottoman control of the straits and the new fortress at Rumeli Hisari. Either way, Constantine's reality remains. Aid is not arriving at the scale required, and he must act as if no rescue exists. The siege tightens toward an ending. The bombards open wider damage. The Ottomans fill ditches, push forward, coordinate attacks. Mehmed's constraint is also visible. Prolonged siege risks disease, supply strain, and dissent among troops if victory stalls. He needs a decisive breach to convert effort into legitimacy. In late May, Mehmed prepares for a final assault. He orders prayers, distributions, and promises of reward, public signals that bind the army to the outcome. In Constantinople, Constantine's own public act is the mirror image. He moves through the defensive lines, confers with commanders, and, according to later tradition, seeks forgiveness and unity among factions in a final service. Whatever the exact details, the political function is clear. The emperor needs the city to behave like a single body for one more night. On May 29, 1453, the final assault begins. Waves of attackers press the walls. The defense depends on holding breaches, preventing panic, and keeping commanders alive. At a critical moment, Giustiniani is wounded and withdraws from his post. The immediate consequence is disproportionate. His retreat signals collapse, whether or not the walls are yet lost. Units that were holding because they believed the line was stable begin to break. Constantine is forced into the last decision every doomed ruler faces: flee to preserve a claim, or stay to preserve a meaning. A flight might allow a government in exile, a negotiated future, a continued Palaiologan identity somewhere else. But flight could also shatter the defenders instantly, transforming organized resistance into massacre. Staying offers no strategic victory, only a final assertion that the empire is not surrendered by its own hand. He stays. Accounts differ on the precise circumstances of his death: whether his body was recognized, whether he died near a specific gate, whether identification was made by imperial insignia. The contested detail matters less than why it became contested. A last emperor who vanishes into the melee is a symbol too powerful to pin down. Uncertainty allows myth to grow, of a hidden survival of a marble emperor waiting to return, because the people left behind need a future tense for their past. Constantinople falls. The immediate consequences are political and systemic, not merely tragic. Mehmed converts conquest into statecraft. The city becomes an imperial capital, its institutions reorganized under Ottoman rule. The Orthodox Church survives, but within a new legal framework, recognized as a community with defined leadership and responsibilities, a mechanism to govern subjects as well as to worship. For the wider world, the fall rewires behavior. Italian powers recalibrate trade and diplomacy around the Ottoman state. Eastern Christian polities learn that appeals to Western unity come with strings and delays. The papacy's ability to marshal a coherent military response is exposed as limited, and Ottoman legitimacy is transformed. After 1453, the Sultan is no longer merely a frontier warlord turned monarch. He is a ruler of a city that once crowned Roman emperors, with a claim to universal authority that reshapes how Europe and the Middle East negotiate power. Constantine XI's legacy remains contested, because it sits at the intersection of agency and inevitability. He did not lose a healthy empire. He inherited a capital sustained for decades by contingency, by Timur's invasion, by Ottoman civil wars, by Western hesitation, by bargains that postponed collapse while corroding unity. Yet his final stand was not meaningless theater. It was a last attempt to keep legitimacy from dissolving into betrayal, to keep a population from tearing itself apart in surrender negotiations, and to deny Mehmed an effortless transition from siege to administration. In the end, Constantinople's fall was not the death of Rome in a single morning, so much as the confirmation of a new rule of history. Walls and titles no longer decided sovereignty by themselves. Canon, logistics, centralized revenue, and disciplined succession did. Constantine died defending an idea whose material foundations had already moved elsewhere, and the world that replaced him learned to build states that would not need miracles, because miracles were no longer